Today we're going to talk about migraines. Everybody, they impact everybody, right? You either are someone who struggles with migraines or you know someone who struggles with migraines, and you know how horrible they can be. This show actually is inspired by a client of mine who we have been working together and working through what has been going on with her. And I really, I've learned a lot, and of course bringing in the genetic component to this stuff is a huge part of me and my process, and the digging into, the different patterns and the different, just the different things, for lack of a better word, that people struggle with, that maybe are some of those underlying things that we don't see, don't understand. But then when we start to dig, we start to be able to put more pieces of the puzzle together, right? And we start to understand patterns better. And so I thought, well, even though I'm not, a migraine expert by far, I think that, we've made good progress with her, and we continue to make really good progress. And, I think it's a matter of, really just taking the time, whether you are, I think, a practitioner or a client or a patient or just someone who struggles with migraines, knowing that there are ways of digging and learning more about your body and how we can manage things like migraines and other symptoms just by digging into how you're made, right? Which is really cool stuff. So first, though, I get off on a tangent sometimes, but first things first, we start the show with gratitude. Gratitude can change the world. I really fully believe that. I'm grateful today. Man, it is beautiful. It's March and it's amazing. I've got the top off on my car. It's so good. I'm so super grateful for that. But I think really, as I was driving up here to the studio, what I was thinking about was how grateful I am to be in a place with science, with healthcare, with medicine, where we can look at how God created us and have more answers to how we can optimize, how we can manage symptoms, who we are at such a deep and amazing level, that we have the ability to move past things, some of these symptoms that we struggle with, just by how deep we can now go to understand who we are biologically, who we are genetically, to just be the best we can be, right? We're put here for a reason. We all have a purpose. And I think that I know that when we don't feel well, we don't do well. If you know my story at all, I struggled with a headache for 2 years. It was not migraine related, but it was a significant headache that basically took me out for 2 years. And so it's near and dear to my heart. And headaches are hard, whether it's migraine or not. Headaches are a really difficult thing to try to uncover what the root causes of them. I mean, you've got these pain specialists who work on headaches all the time. And so for me, coming at it from a perspective of not the symptom itself, but what is causing the symptom, it doesn't matter what the symptom is, right? We need to dig to go to the foundation of health, to the we say it all the time, right? In functional nutrition, functional medicine, it's really understanding the root cause, because the root cause can be similar for a lot of people, but they express in different ways, right? So for some people, it might be migraines. For other people, it might be brain fog. For others, it might be GI symptoms. For others, it could be, joint pain. I mean, you name it, on down into the super serious conditions that we deal with as a society. Your cancers and your diabetes and all of these things. We have potential genetically, epigenetically. We all have a potential, but it doesn't mean that potential has to express. And so when they do start to express as symptoms, then it's our job, it's my job obviously, but it's our job to do the testing, look at what we have access to, look at the genetics, look at environment, look at what's going on in life, look at trauma history, right? There are all of these things that can play into the symptoms that can express. And so that piece of it doesn't change. The uncovering of it doesn't change. The testing and the learning of the situation doesn't change. So then when we know that, we can address those things, and however the symptoms are expressing, the goal obviously is then to minimize, mitigate, eliminate, whatever we can do those symptoms so we feel better. And so we then have the ability to do the things that we need to do. So we'll jump into this a little bit. Again, knowing that I'm not a migraine expert, but when I'm inspired by a client, I'm inspired by my clients all the time. My clients work really hard, and they're amazing at what they do, and I learn from them constantly. And so this situation with this current client, there are a lot of things that are going on that can push a migraine situation, right? So there is blood sugar dysregulation. That is not necessarily her fault, right? So, before we met, there were certainly some diet things that we needed to manage and control, but this was a long-going blood sugar issue that there's something else with it that's going on, right? Is this part of her migraine story? Potentially, and probably. But then there are other conditions that she's struggling with, and so there's a lot of complexity going on there. And so when I'm looking at this from the outside looking in, it's kind of taking the pieces and the parts of it and trying to understand each and then addressing that, right? So I'll tell you, one of the first things we did is we went after a microbiome, and so we start to build that microbiome hardcore, right? We want to really build that up so it's nice and robust, and then that microbiome does a lot of things, right? The microbiome can help with blood sugar management. The microbiome can help with detoxification. The microbiome can help with creating more amino acids and creating nutrients and that kind of thing. So and supporting neurotransmitters. So all of these things are foundational to migraines and lots of other symptoms, right? So, but then we start bringing in the genetic component. And when we bring in the genetic component to migraines or anything else, the things that we can look at are what are the genetics that are pushing maybe excessive inflammation and why? What are the genetics that are creating these blood sugar imbalances and dysregulations, even though the meals are her, the food she's eating she's doing really well with the food that she eats. What is it that maybe, because we're starting to learn too that part of her issue is hormonal, part of her issue is likely histamine related, so we're going to get into all of these. All of these things have a genetic component to them. And so there are times when sorry, I just lost my Facebook feed. Anyway, there are times when there are some people who all of these things kind of stack on together and our bucket overloads, right? And so we talk about this. We have, So we have essentially, whether it's a toxic bucket or the symptoms that we struggle with, it's histamines or you name it, right? And the body just gets to a point where it's okay, I'm overflowing and I have no more, and so that's when it triggers the symptom, whatever that symptom might be, right? And for this situation specifically, can trigger the migraines. And so I think for most people, there's not just one trigger; there are multiple triggers. But what if we can decrease that burden, decrease that bucket, so there's no overload, right? Things are still going to happen, but how do we manage that, and how do we keep it from overflowing, so then we keep the triggering, we keep the migraines, we keep the symptoms at bay. So that's the ultimate goal, right? So we can look at this. There are a couple of questions that we can ask, right? When it comes to, I think as a medical society, when we look at migraines, we look at it as, what is the one trigger that we can manage to keep our symptoms or migraine from happening, right? How do I not drink wine? Do I not eat chocolate? But there are triggers that trigger different people. And so in my mind, a trigger like a piece of chocolate, or a trigger like a glass of wine, or whatever, or even if it's a hormonal trigger, that's not the answer, because there's more to it. Why is that triggering in the first place, right? So we've got to ask better questions, and not just stop at, well, this is my trigger, so I don't do it, because that's not normal. We shouldn't have triggers like that, right? And so we want to dig into what the patterns are, so we can then start to understand the biology behind it and the biochemistry behind it, so then we can support the body to a degree, or in a manner that it's not going to be so angry, because that's really what I see, right? I see the inflammatory response. I see these as just the body is, it's angry. It's trying to tell you, it's like, hey, I got something going on and we got to fix it, right? And that's with any symptom. And so genetics have the potential, and we talk about this a lot. So let's kind of take it back, if you're new to the show, or new to me, the difference between genetics and epigenetics. So we've got our genes, which are what you see essentially, right? A lot of what you see. And then we have our epigenome. So our epigenome are locations that sit on top of genes that control gene expression. There was a time where there was the thought that we had no control over our genes, right? My whole family had cardiovascular disease. That's going to be me too. We now know that that's not the case, right? So we can have the potential in our genes, but it's our epigenome that controls that potential. What controls the epigenome, which is why I love this so much, right? What controls the epigenome is every decision that we make every day is going to impact our epigenome, which in turn will impact our genetic expression. Fascinating stuff, right? And so what I choose to put in my body, what I choose to put on my body, what I choose to have in my environment, in my home environment, what I choose to think about myself, what I choose to say to myself, how I choose to take in information and use that information in a positive or a negative way, my history of trauma, my relationships, my finances, right? All of these things play a role in how our genes express. And so for me specifically, I have a few things that I know that I have potential for. I have potential for celiac disease. I have the potential for other autoimmune diseases. We can see those two things kind of fairly specifically. I have the potential for Alzheimer's, significant potential for Alzheimer's. And so knowing that gives me the ability to fill my tool belt with tools that are going to allow me to mitigate the risk of these conditions expressing. And so let's take celiac disease for one. I know it's in my genes, and I know I have sensitivity to gluten. So what does that mean? Well, it means a couple of things. I keep my inflammatory responses down by the way that I live my life. I keep the gluten at minimum. Now, for some people, it needs to be completely eliminated. I'll tell you, I eliminated gluten entirely for probably 8 years. And as a test, I've brought it in very minimally, but I have, and I don't react to it the way that I used to. The fact, though, that I have potential for celiac disease, though, means that I want to keep it minimal or keep it out entirely. I also need to keep down my inflammatory responses, right? It's the inflammation that's going to push all of this stuff, right? And so stress causes inflammation. The way we talk to ourselves in a negative manner causes inflammation, right? And it can just downward spiral. So there are lots of ways of mitigating these risks, but the focus has got to be inflammation, right? And if I were to just throw in and eat a bunch of gluten, that's over time, it's going to push the inflammatory response. So let's see. So our genes do quite a few things, right? Our epigenome. So they can influence how our systems function, and they can influence how our systems function specifically under stress. And so it can influence our detoxification. It can influence, like I said, our inflammatory response, our nervous system and our nervous system sensitivity, nutrient requirements. And so what we need to make sure that we're understanding about genes is it's not that we have genes that are going to create migraines, right? But it's all of these other factors together that can push that bucket to overflow, which then for those who are prone to migraines, that's how the symptom presents. And so genetics can shape our tolerance and our resilience. And so when we know what our genetics are, we then have the ability we can play a role in supporting our genes when there is maybe some certain situations where we need to control inflammation, right? Or we need to control our nervous system regulation and that kind of thing. So we have the ability, when we know, we have the ability to know what to do about it, which is the best thing about this, right? So this is, I will say it a million times over, but it's this, it's such a gift to understand our epigenome, because to me, this is God's gift of free will, right? We make the choices every day on how we were going to live our life and the foods we're going to eat and the things we're going to do. For the most part, there are things that we can't control, but we have so much power and so much choice every day in how we live life, right? It's amazing, right? And nobody's perfect. I'm certainly not perfect. But I have information about myself, so I know what the things that I need to do, and I'm constantly learning to live my life as optimally and as fully as possible. So let's see. Okay, so there are I think that the things that we want, if as we're kind of digging into migraines and sort of that migraine threshold, if we're talking about that bucket overflowing and that burden just getting to be too much, right? So there are things that we can look at, and there are these inputs that can contribute to the load. And some of these we've already talked about, but the emotional and physical stress, right? If you have a history of trauma, that could be enough to fill your bucket enough, right? So then we have to understand what it is that we need to do to regulate your nervous system so that doesn't happen. But it can also be pushed by, poor or disrupted sleep. That's a big one. We just don't sleep very well anymore, right? So blood sugar instability, hormonal fluctuations, dietary components, of course, and we hear a lot now about histamine intolerance, mast cell activation syndrome. This is for some people a situation. It can happen for multiple reasons, but it's the immune system throwing out it's mast cells. Basically, it's these crazy, if you want to call them, allergic responses that are really hard on the body. So they can present as GI issues. It can present as like red skin and allergies. It can present as migraines. So it can present in different ways, and sometimes it can be difficult to understand or to determine if histamine is what's causing an issue, because it kind of look like a lot of different things. And histamines, if there's infection, if you've heard of SIBO can push histamine flares and histamine responses. So there are a lot of things that still, if there's somebody might have some histamine intolerance, but that's not the end of it. There's more. We still have to ask the question why. And so then, of course, we've got environmental exposures, the chemicals, allergens, light and noise for some people. I think any of you who have had migraines, you know that. So there's a sensitivity to the light and the noise, and sometimes light and noise can trigger the migraines. And so we want to, not to be too repetitive, but to repeat, once we understand the things that fill our bucket to the point of overflow, we can then start to minimize, mitigate, and understand better what we can do. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about neurotransmitters and brain excitability. So, our neurotransmitters in large part are they control our excitability for life. They control our happiness. They can control our motivation, right? And hormones can do the same thing. But when we're looking at neurotransmitters, they can be controlled by the GI, also by genetics. And so, if we're looking at the different neurotransmitters, we've got dopamine, serotonin, GABA, glutamate. Dopamine is motivation and reward. Serotonin's our happy neurotransmitter, right? It's mood, it's sensory processing, it's pain perception. Then we've got GABA, which is calming, and we've got glutamate, which is excitatory. And so glutamate specifically, if we were to think about monosodium glutamate, that can be a trigger for some people, whether it's anxiety or migraines, right? So monosodium glutamate is an additive to food. We hear about it like in Chinese food a lot, right? But it's like a flavor enhancer, I think. But what it can do for certain people who have these SNPs, these glutamate SNPs, is you take in, it can be just glutamine, right? Glutamine is just an amino acid. But it can be glutamine, it can be glutamate. It goes up to, and glutamate is excitatory. But what's supposed to happen if you have if your biochemistry is, I was going to say that wrong. I don't want it to sound like we're created by mistake, or that the way that we're created is a mistake, because that's not right. But sometimes pathways need to be supported in a manner because we're different than other people, and we need to understand how to support those pathways. So if there's an interruption in the glutamate pathway where it doesn't go down the GABA pathway, so glutamate goes up, it's excitatory, and it's supposed to naturally go down to GABA, which is calming, right? So what can happen if there's an interruption in this pathway is we stay at glutamate, it's excitatory, it doesn't go down to GABA. So then we have an inflammatory response neurologically, and we can, and then so that's when anxiety can present, that's when migraines can present, and that kind of thing. So it doesn't have to be monosodium glutamate. I want to make that clear. It might, bone broth is really high in glutamine, right? So, which is an amazing thing. It's great for the GI, but for some people with this SNP, we've got to be really careful with what we're taking in, because if we're pushing that glutamate pathway and there's a SNP there that's not allowing it to go down to GABA, then we start to see symptoms. And so we just support that pathway, right? It's a beautiful thing to understand this, because we just support that pathway. And so we can, these different genetic variants can then control how quickly neurotransmitters are produced and broken down, but also the balance between the excitatory and the calming signals, right? And so again, understanding these pathways is key to managing our symptoms, whatever those symptoms are. And so when a system is more sensitive, the things that it can feel like, right, is overstimulation. Migraines can be triggered by stress or mental overload. Difficulty recovering once symptoms begin. So this is something that my client struggles with, is once they begin, it's really difficult to recover from the migraine itself, and how do you control it, right? And then, the drugs, I know this also, that the drugs, they all have their own symptoms that go along with it. So for her specifically, it takes days. And when she's having a migraine every day, right, it's just this nasty loop, right? And so you got to figure out how to stop this loop. And the drugs, they can be helpful, but they also are really, really tough on a body. And so if we move on to inflammation and immune reactivity. So this is how the body reacts to stress, to injury, to environmental and dietary inputs, right? So if we have toxins in our environment, which is really hard to control, but we can control the toxins that are in our home environment. We can control the toxins that we put in our yards and in our gardens. We can control the toxins that we put on our skin, right? So this is a big deal. The things that we put on our skin, that we put in our hair, that we wash our clothes with, that we clean our homes with. These things can have the ability to really push that toxic overload. And so when we're looking at the inflammatory response, it might not be that there's a chronic inflammatory response, but it might be that it's just amplified or it's reactive. And this can be based on genes. And so you can have this stronger inflammatory signaling, and you can have a slower resolution of inflammation. So these things combined can push and trigger symptoms, right? And so common triggers, we talked about this a little bit, infections. And so we know that that SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or SIFO, small intestinal fungal overgrowth, that those two things have the potential of pushing, they'll push inflammation, they can push migraines. They can push, there's something that I was going to say. Anyway, but, histamines. That's what I was going to say. So if we know that that's something that we're struggling with, then we need to understand why the infection's there in the first place. It's not that the infection is just there. Why is it there, right? And so usually SIBO, SIFO, these are secondary infections. There's something else going on. So again, always ask questions and continue to ask questions on all of this stuff, because it matters. It really matters if we want to understand the root cause. And so poor sleep, psychological stress, certain foods, right? Certain foods can push histamines, which can trigger migraines. And that may or may not be an issue for some people. It really just depends. And so migraines during what this can feel like, and this is so interesting because this is what we're seeing with my client, is migraines can occur during or after an illness. So here's what we see. Migraines every day, and then which had been, I think, over a year that this has been going on. So then we didn't have a migraine for 3 weeks, and there are a couple of things that pushed it, that created the migraine again. Her cycle and getting sick. So it's like the bucket, even though we had things under control, the hormonal fluctuations push that bucket to overflow, right? And then on top of that, getting sick, which impacts everything, right? Push that bucket to overflow. And so then I think it triggered a migraine for a week, which it hurts my heart so much. But so we're starting then, as we're looking at genetics, starting to see her inflammatory genes. She's got several of those. She's got histamine genes. So there's a DAO gene that if you don't have enough DAO enzyme, it doesn't break down histamines well. And so we have her heightened inflammatory response. We have her heightened sensitivity potentially to histamines. So on top of then, the bucket overflowing. So how do we then manage the histamine response? How do we manage the immune system so she doesn't get sick? How do we manage the infection that's there that is potentially pushing the histamines, right? So there's all of these different things that we're trying to pull together to bring down the migraine triggers. So let's see, what else we got? Okay, so now we're moving into, we'll dig a little bit more into histamine and mast cell activity. So Histamines do a couple of things, right? Their immune defense, their digestion, their brain signaling, and it's not that histamines themselves are the problem, but it's the balance between the input and the breakdown, right? And so histamines are normal, they're natural, right? They have a job to do. And so when we have, I just said this a minute ago, but want to repeat it, that if we have reduced DAO activity, and so there's a DAO gene, then there's a less efficient breakdown in the gut of histamines. So this can contribute to GI symptoms, but it can contribute to all kinds of stuff, brain fog and all kinds of stuff, pain. And so there's an increased release due to stress and immune activation, and then gut microbes can contribute to histamine production. So this is not that these microbes are bad. I mean, the microbes are good. There are histamine pushing microbes that are beneficial to us. But if we already have a histamine intolerance, if we're taking probiotics that are pushing histamines and we already have a histamine issue, then those probiotics, which for some people are good, are actually not going to be good for us, at least while we don't have these histamine flares under control. So we've got to be really careful about that. We might think that we're doing the right thing by taking these great probiotics, and we might be, except it's what's pushing our symptoms, which is then pushing the migraine. So we got to, it's just unwinding, right? We got to unwind some of these things. And that's why I have to ask so many questions when I'm working with someone, and questions of myself and questions of them and questions of all of the things, because we've got to make sure that we're not missing what are the things that are triggering whatever the symptom is, obviously including migraines. So histamine often interacts with inflammation and nervous system sensitivity, and so what that can feel like, migraines after aged or fermented foods or alcohol, right? We hit on that a little bit. But then there can be sinus pressure, there can be flushing, and there can be skin reactions. And so histamines are not, almost never the sole cause, right? But it can act as sort of an amplifier, right? So knowing our genetics when it comes to histamines, well, in all of these things, right? Because there are so many layers and levels to it, we've got to understand all of them. And so probably most people know and have heard is that there is a vascular component to migraines, right, and to blood flow. And so essentially what we're looking at, there's blood vessel tone and regulation. And so there's this dilation and constriction of blood vessels and nitric oxide hard for me to talk today. Nitric oxide signaling. Nitric oxide is super important, but we can have these SNPs, they're NOS SNPs, that can play a role in these migraines. And so the genetic variabilities may influence how reactive blood vessels are to the stressors, okay, and then how stable blood flow regulation is. And so the other factors that can play a role in the vascular influence is hydration status, electrolyte imbalance, stress hormones, right? And so if we're super stressed, if we're not getting enough water, if our electrolytes are out of balance, which happens a lot, so we're not getting truly hydrated, electrolytes are just minerals. It's our magnesium and potassium and calcium and chloride, right? So these are really important. I'm finding that I'm giving myself, and then my clients and patients electrolytes all the time. And so I think that this is kind of one of those foundational supplements that can be really beneficial for people. But on top of that, I think it's important that it's not that electrolytes, yes, but it's all the minerals. We're all, tend to be our food's deficient in minerals, right? That and specifically trace minerals. We've got to have trace minerals, and we're not getting enough of those either. So one of my favorite electrolytes, I have a couple of them, but has trace minerals in them. But also, just doing the minerals with trace minerals by itself, it could be as simple as doing like Himalayan sea salt, right? That's why Himalayan or any kind of sea salt is so good, because it's fully intact. It's a super healthy, beneficial nutrient. Salt is. I'm not going to get into that conversation, but know that salt is not the enemy, right? Salt is not evil. It's the table salt that is. Anyway, so we need to understand our electrolyte balance and our stress hormones. And so what this can feel like, of course, this is kind of a given, really, but it's the throbbing and the pulsing, right? And then we can have, for many, triggered migraines that are triggered by dehydration, sleep disruptions, so forth. And so the vascular changes are usually just a secondary response. So, but genetically, we can have variants that can make us more susceptible to migraines based on these vascular the responses, right? So energy production in mitochondria. If we don't remember what mitochondria are, they're little energy engines, right? They create energy. They create how we live our life, right? We have a few to millions per cell. If you think about our brains and you think about our heart, they're working all the time. So the more they work, the more mitochondria they're going to have, because the more energy they have to produce. So we can have situations of mitochondrial stress, mitochondrial dysfunction, based on a whole lot of things, right? It's all the stuff that we talk about all the time: toxins, nutrient deficiencies, stress, right? The list can go on, but this can create mitochondrial dysfunction. And so what do we feel? Fatigued. We don't have the energy, we don't have the motivation to go get stuff done. And so migraines then can reflect a temporary mismatch between energy demand and supply, right? So if we have dysfunction of our mitochondria and it's not producing energy, and we have a significant energy demand, that can trigger a migraine. So contributing factors: oxidative stress. What is that? Oxidative stress: too many pro-oxidants, not enough antioxidants, right? So this is why we need to eat our fruits and vegetables, right? They're so high in antioxidants. In our fruits, are bright blues and reds and yellows and oranges, so high in these amazing antioxidants. But then we've got glutathione, which is our master antioxidant. And so we have to have enough of that. There can be glutathione SNPs. So if we're not producing enough glutathione to support our detoxification and our antioxidant capacity, then that can be problematic as well. So oxidative stress can happen because of toxins in the environment, toxins in our food, you name it, right? And so if we're not able to clear those, then it just builds up and creates a problem. And so we can have, it can increase nutrient demand and inefficient mitochondrial function under stress. So there are specific genetics that can influence how efficiently cells produce and utilize energy. And so what this then can feel like is migraines happen when meals are skipped, sleep is inefficient or insufficient, and stress is prolonged. And so we've got to support our mitochondria in order to have energy, right? And I think that we can assume, or I know that we can assume, anytime that there are symptoms, there's some kind of mitochondrial dysfunction. So we want to support those systems. Knowing your genetics is going to be really helpful in learning how to support those systems and all of these systems. Okay, blood sugar regulation. So yes, we can have blood sugar dysregulation based on the foods that we eat. Even those of us who are super healthy, right? I'm a pretty healthy chick. And one of the things is that when I think I had said this before, but I wore the continuous glucose monitor so I could understand my own blood sugar patterns, right? And understanding these patterns help us to understand what it is we need to do to it's more data, right? That's what I like, because I like to bring all the data together so I have the big picture. And one of the things that I realized is I am super reactive to fruit. but that's also me genetically, right? And so as I started to dig in, so I had for breakfast one morning, I had a grapefruit. I think it was probably the whole grapefruit. I probably had the whole grapefruit, but they're not very sweet. I mean, they're sweet enough, but you wouldn't expect it to just throw your blood sugar out of whack. And it hit me. It pushed me up to almost 200, and I was shocked. I was like, holy smokes! So it helped me to understand what I need to do to manage my own blood sugar, because for me personally, if I have significant blood sugar swings, it's going to impact me cognitively. If I have potential for Alzheimer's, I need to watch the things that are going to impact me cognitively. And so I need to know and understand how to mitigate these big swings, both high and low, so I am managing my genes in my cognitive health, right? And so we can the brain uses glucose. We've got to have glucose. The brain uses glucose and it uses ketones. And so the brain depends on stable glucose, though, right? And so fluctuations in glucose can trigger stress hormone release. And so we'll see that stress pushes glucose. So if you're eating beautifully and perfectly and you're super stressed and your glucose levels are high, it's because you're stressed. And so it can also increase neurological sensitivity. And so these tendencies may affect insulin response and glucose uptake and regulation. And so the common patterns are, if you delay your meals, then you get a headache, right? If you have high carb meals, then you crash and then it creates a migraine, right? So think about these things as potential triggers, and then what are the genetics that are pushing this potential. So it can feel like irritability, fatigue, headache between meals, so forth, right? And you might have a lot of these things, right? If you're prone to migraines, it could be that you're sort of stacking these. Okay, so what we can do if this is something that is an issue for you, of course, consistent balanced meals, that can reduce migraine frequency in some people. So detoxification and sensitivity inputs. So the body has to process caffeine, alcohol, medications, environmental chemicals, and we all process these things differently. We all have different detox patterns based on our genes. And so genetic variability can affect how quickly substances are metabolized and how long they remain in the system. So an example of this, grapefruit has a big impact on on one of our detox pathways, and it's the detox pathway that is also involved in drug metabolism. So if you eat grapefruit with certain drugs that are metabolized in this pathway, then it's going to impact the dosing, essentially, right? It's not the dosing that you took, but it'll impact the dosing because of the detox pathway. So there are, you've probably seen this on if you've had pill bottles or prescriptions, that it might say not to eat with grapefruit and certain things, and that can be why. Caffeine is something that for some people that in and of itself can trigger a migraine, because there are genetics that will either upregulate or downregulate caffeine metabolism. Super cool stuff, because for some people, caffeine gives them energy. It helps their brain function better. It helps them to see clearer, right? But then for some people, it pushes anxiety. It can push migraines. And so knowing your caffeine detox capabilities, potential, can help you understand if it's actually something that's going to be supportive for you or not, right? And so, let's see. I think that this is kind of a given, but slower processing can lead to prolonged stimulation, increased sensitivity to smaller exposures. And what this can feel like is strong reactions to caffeine or alcohol, and then lingering effects of medications. We kind of already hit on that. And so let's move on into, I'd hit on this a little bit, but I think for most people, who are struggling with migraines or other symptoms, that it's not about, sometimes it's one thing, but oftentimes these things are stacked, right? It can be multiple layers of genes, of burden that are pushing the symptom and or the migraine. And so we want to be able to reduce that burden as much as possible, so we're reducing the frequency, hopefully eliminating migraines and understanding the things that are most going to push that overflow. So they can occur when multiple symptoms are activated simultaneously, right? So if we think about, this is sort of an example, but poor sleep increases stress. You have irregular meals and dietary triggers. So each one alone might be tolerated, but all of those together might push that threshold where it is just too much for the system to handle the nervous system, the excitatory system, right? And then the inflammation and the headache is triggered. And so this can, looking at it in this way helps us to understand why people are so different, right? For one, our genetics are all different, but everybody has their different triggers and their different stacking of triggers, right? And so, and some people just might take longer to recover, and that's hard too. And so that's why it's hard also when we're trying to find the one trigger, when oftentimes it's not just that. And that's my ultimate goal with whatever the situation is for the clients I'm working with or the patients I'm working with, is to help them learn and understand their body and partner with their body so they know what it is they can do to support their genes, their environment, their biochemistry, so the symptoms don't happen. Because this is the stuff that, the stuff that we're working on today is the stuff that they take with them for the rest of their life. And the stuff that I'm learning on myself today is the stuff that I'm taking with me for the rest of my life, right? So if we take it back to, whether it's the celiac gene or the Alzheimer's gene, the things that I'm doing today mitigate that risk, right? I have autoimmune disease all over my family. I have it nowhere, at least right now, it's nowhere in any of my labs. So this is the stuff that I test because I want to stay on top of it. But it's also the stuff that is front of mind for me, especially the Alzheimer's gene, right? I'm less concerned about the celiac autoimmune stuff, but the Alzheimer's one is one that for some people is really scary, and it can be a scary gene. But I do the things every day in the way that I eat, in the way that I combine foods, in the way that I work out. All of these things are front of mind for me every day as I'm working through making sure that this isn't something that I put my family through later on, right? And I'm testing my cognitive function, right? I just did it last week. I was testing my cognitive function, and I'm great. So that makes me really happy because sometimes I do lose my words, and I think that can be hormonal as well. I mean, I know it can be hormonal. So, but I am doing the best that I can to stay on top of all of these pieces that are going to help me to live as fully as I can for as long as I'm here. And that's what I want for my clients and my patients as well. And so I know not everybody wants to dig as deeply as I want to dig, but that's why I do the digging, and I say, okay, this is what you need to do, and this is what you can carry with you, right? It's not about knowing all of the things and digging, and wanting to go as deep as I go. But that's what I love to do. So I can help, keep it kind of surface level for clients and patients, and just give, this is what's going to help you moving forward, and have that better understanding and how to manage and mitigate symptoms. So anyway, let's see. So I think that when we're looking at how how to do so many things all at one time, because I think sometimes it does feel like it's a lot, and it can feel overwhelming. And I think that that's not my goal here. It really is about baby steps, and that's what we're currently doing with my client now. It took us a little bit of time to start um, making some progress, and know this too. And I see this in pretty much everyone, especially when there's a lot of complexity. Um, but there's definitely the up and down, right? You're gonna have your ups and downs, and the goal is that you have that upward trajectory, right? You're just continuing to go up, even if you go down. That 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of situation. And so, for a little bit of maybe context around what we're doing to help her specifically, is we're looking at hormones. We're looking at how can we optimize her hormones so the cycles don't trigger her. How do we look at her gut health, support any kind of infection that's going on, or eliminate any kind of infection that's going on that might push inflammation, that might push histamines to not trigger the migraine, right? So those are things that we have to do slowly and steadily, and it's a continuous learning process as we continue to uncover, as we continue to go deeper, as we continue to support on different levels. And it is an educated uh, learning process, if that makes sense, right? So there's a lot of knowledge that's already there, but we have to continue to educate ourselves through, again, through the labs, through the genetics, through how her body responds to what we're doing, good and bad, and keep playing on that. So if something, say we start a supplement and it doesn't work for her, we know that now, and we can probably determine why based on what that supplement is. But then if something does work, then that gives us more clarity on what we're doing and how we're moving forward. The fact that she didn't have a headache or have a migraine for 3 weeks is game changing in your mental and emotional health, and wanting to continue to move forward, and wanting and knowing that it's possible, right? That the things that we're doing, we are cleaning up some of the junk, and we are supporting pathways better that then will keep her bucket from overflowing. And so what I see is her bucket right now is just right at that edge, right? So any little thing is going to push her over, but she's not constantly overflowing, right? She was just constantly overflowing. It was horrible for her. Now we just need to continue to decrease that load, and it takes time. I think that that's probably one of the things that I have to talk to anybody who has any kind of complexity in their case is patience, which is really hard, and knowing that, especially when things have been going on for a really long time. I have a client who has had GI issues for 30 years. 30 years. I mean, imagine what has been going on. I talk about that downward cycle, and I can see it in her, right? But when you struggle for that long, and whatever has been pushing those GI symptoms for 30 years, and how they continue to proliferate and push inflammation and create more and more and more issues, this is not okay. But when something takes a long time for us to start to reverse, it's going to probably take a long time to actually reverse. Now, sometimes, and I do see this a lot, that especially with GI symptoms, and there are a couple of things in this particular situation where we can make big changes quickly, and I see that in her case. So this is really cool because it's motivating. We want to motivate as quickly as possible. We want to see symptoms reduce as quickly as possible. Sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. It does take time, but when we finally start to see symptom reduction, migraine reduction, this is it's super exciting. And I know it's exciting for my clients, but it's exciting for me too, to go, okay, we're making progress and what we're doing is actually working. So I think, if we were to look at, and probably I should have done this as we were going through each system, but there are some supplements that can be beneficial for certain people, right? And so if we're looking at energy production and mitochondrial support, we're looking at things like CoQ10 and magnesium. If we're looking at nervous system regulation, we might think about ashwagandha and magnesium. So and if there's histamine, right, quercetin. Quercetin is really good for helping to squash histamine. Now, we've got to remember, though, that supplementation, it may support, it may cover up, right? Supplementation can do the same thing to a degree as drugs, and I say that meaning that it can squash a symptom without actually fixing the problem. And so sometimes we need to take a drug or we need to take a supplement to help us to get through the trigger, to get through the symptom, to get through the migraine, but we still have to make sure that we're uncovering what the root cause is so the body can work on its own. Supplementation is amazing. I use a lot of supplementation and it works really well when we get it right. But my ultimate goal is minimal supplementation. Sometimes it's a lot in the beginning, but minimal supplementation because I want the body to work. But with some of these pathways, we just start to realize, okay, this is something that I'm going to need to support this pathway probably for the rest of my life. I have a supplement that I take for my methylation. I don't even have massive methylation SNPs, but they're enough to where they create enough of a problem for me that I know that there's a supplement that I'll probably end up taking for the rest of my life. I still pulse it. I'll take it for a while and then I'll stop for a while and I'll take it for a while and I'll stop for a while. But these things the things that I want to support are my cognitive function, my methylation pathways, and then there are going to be things that move through that I need to move through. Inflammatory pathways. So I know that I'm mitigating my risk later on. So let's see, anything else that we want to chat with here? I don't think so. I think that that's pretty good. I think my hope is if you get anything out of this, which is always my hope, is that you just ask more questions and dig deeper and find somebody who wants to help you dig, because that's so key to helping you move past whatever it is that you're struggling with, and who's not going to just sit there on surface level stuff and say, here's your drug or here's your supplement and move on. Because know that the body is always communicating with us, and when we learn what it's trying to tell us is when we begin to partner with our body. We begin to come together as a team instead of fighting it. And that's the thing that I see so often is when clients and patients come to me in the beginning, it's a fight, it's a struggle, it's this battle of butting heads with your body because you can't figure out why you hurt so bad, you can't figure out why the pain's so bad, you can't figure out why you can't think very clearly, whatever it is, and you just feel like it's this constant battle. You can't figure out why food doesn't like you or why your body's always in pain when you eat, right? It's all of these things that just feel like it's this horrible struggle, and that you're in this fight when the body's just trying to keep you alive. It's just trying to keep you alive, and it's trying to talk to you and say, hey, we got some stuff going on that we need to work toward and manage, and I need your help in this. And so if we flip this script to, okay, I'm no longer fighting my body, I'm partnering with my body, so we have the same goal of living a good, strong, healthy, robust, purposeful life, then we start to say, okay, what is it that I need? How deep can I go? Who can I find that's on my team to help me. I do this too. I have lots of people on my team. I'm going through this now who are helping me in the places that I don't know enough about. So we've got to have our team to help us to move through these situations. So find the people you trust, find the people who are going to help you dig and who are on your side and going to help you learn how to partner with your body, physically, mentally, emotionally, financially, relationally, spiritually, right? I mean, I think that's a key thing too, right? If getting your, and not, this isn't a not trying to preach, right? But getting our spiritual life into a good spot. And what does that look like for you, right? For me, as a Christian, it's my daily, which I missed this morning because I got up late, but it's my daily morning grounding of my prayer time, my Bible study, digging into why I'm here, what it is that I'm supposed to be doing, and how I'm supposed to be doing it to honor God, right? I mean, this is what I know I'm here to do, and sometimes I'm like, what am I here to do? We're all a lot of times trying to figure that out. And I have a lot of questions, but every day I'm learning more and more and more about what I'm here to do and how I'm here to support and creating that spiritual groundedness that helps me every day to do what it is that I know that I'm put here to do. And so finding that, that time, that prayer time, whatever that looks like for you, is, I think, a big deal. And it's regulates the nervous system. That's a key component to this too, is regulating that nervous system. And if you're always searching and always finding and always, trying to figure it out, there's an ungroundedness. So finding that grounding physically, mentally, and emotionally, right? So when I say that, I'm talking about grounding to the earth, getting your shoes off, getting in the grass, getting in the dirt, getting in the water, right? All of these things are grounding and beneficial for our nervous system and nervous system regulation. So anyway, soapbox there, I suppose. But I think we're pretty much at the end of this show. So I hope you got something good out of this. Feel free to reach out if you have questions about anything. I'm always happy to chat. I'm happy to answer questions. My goal is to be of service. If I know someone who is going to be beneficial for you, or if I can be beneficial for you, then that's the stuff that we'll talk about. You can go to the website. You can fill out an assessment that we've got on there, so I can reach out to you. We'll chat a little bit, see how I might be able to help or who I can refer you to. Also, your precision blueprint, we've got the links to that all over the place. You can go to the QR code and learn more. This is really the foundation of who I am and what I do, is this blueprint. It starts as a super individualized report, and then we build on from there, bringing in genetics, bringing in labs, bringing in all of these things. So it's really, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to do, and it's really cool when people are like, holy smokes, I feel like you're talking to me, because I am, right? I mean, that's what it's all about. You're not everybody else. So anyway, you can find us here every Thursday, 10 a.m. Mountain Time, streaming live on KUHSdenver.com. Find me on Taste Life Nutrition, all the socials, the website, all the places is Taste Life Nutrition. Let me know if there's anything that I can do to be of service for you, and I hope to see you back here next week, 10 a.m. We'll see you later. Bye, y'all.